Ms. Brackus, would you lead us in the pledge? Please rise, put your hand on your heart.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we'll observe a moment of silence. Madam Secretary, call the roll, please.
Sheevy. Here. Breckus. Here. Zadra. Here. Delgado. Here. Dorch. Absent. Jardin. Here. Cashel.
Here. This time we'll open up the public comment section. Britt Curtis.
Good morning. My name is Britt Curtis. I run the Holland Project.
Hold the microphone down so that
Sorry.
identify yourself for the record again, please.
My name is Britt Curtis. I run the Holland Project, an all-ages arts and music nonprofit organization for teens and young people. We are located on the edge of Midtown, just off Wells Avenue. The city of Reno, and some of you sitting up there today, have been wonderful supporters of Holland and for youth in our community. It's a tough time to be young and in this state. Nevada is rife with devastating statistics in regards to teens, nearly bottom of the barrel, nationwide in every category, from per pupil spending to graduation rate to drug and alcohol use, teen pregnancy, suicide, and more. Positive opportunities and programs for young people have dwindled, and places that previously provided arts access and cultural education are being severely threatened, leaving a growing void, except in Reno. Arts and culture continues to thrive, and this offers the best insurance for young people in our city to avoid some of the problems I just described. Thanks to the city of Reno, young people, some of the most creative and innovative talent any city can have, know that their city believes in them, their power, their ideas, and their potential. The arts are the best way to do this. Art, music, self-expression, these are the languages young people speak. It's how they connect to their peers throughout the city. By engaging young people in the arts, we are directly impacting their lives for the better, and we're making Reno considerably healthier and more vibrant. These young people are the future cultural creatives and Reno's future business leaders, our future innovators, families, CEOs, and community leaders. We lose young Nevadans all the time to bigger, more culturally active cities in other states. This is a huge threat to the future of our state and its progress. As long as you send the message that arts and culture is important in our city, as long as our young people regard Reno as culturally vibrant, the better chance we have to keep talent here or lure them back and not let other cities and states reap the benefits of our smartest, most creative, and most driven individuals. The arts are the thing that enables young people to become engaged and involved in our community and actually care about it. The thing that keeps them in school, out of trouble, drives them to develop and execute an amazing idea or project, and encourages them to remain passionate and excited. Holland works tirelessly to champion the arts for youth, and we see real results every day. We respectfully ask that you send the message to Reno's young people that arts and culture remain a priority in our city. It is immensely important to our organization and the future leaders of this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Having no other public comment cards, I'll close the public comment section. Bring it back, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion, a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those that oppose, no. Motion carries unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a high-altitude view of our budget for this year and for the coming year. The nitpicking will be at the meeting on the 6th, where we will go through every department line by line and look at it So if we take the overview and look at it today, study it, make questions, and then we'll be going through it line item by line item on the 6th. And I do say pack a sandwich when you come because we will be here a long time on the 6th. You're starting at 1:30 on the 6th? Why so late? I don't want to be here at midnight.
We have a joint meeting in the morning.
Huh?
We have a joint meeting in the morning on that day with
Of
the
who?
county.
I thought we
County
canceled that. Oh. Well, maybe we ought to cancel it since we've got a budget hearing. But anyway, this is the high altitude, and take notes, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for queuing up and setting the stage for what today will look like. For the record, I'm Kate Thomas with the Office of Management and Budget, and I'm here today to present to you the preliminary workshop overview of the budget for the current fiscal year as well as the coming fiscal year. We're also going to take a little break here in about 15-20 minutes, or actually I think we're time certain for 9:30, to get a regional economic overview from Mr. Brian Bonenfant from the Center for Regional Studies. We were going to provide that information to you as typical fashion. We would do it during the strategic planning session, but because of the constituency of the new council, we felt that it would be better to do it during this workshop and let you focus on those high-level decisions at that time in February when you set forth our direction. So I'm going to start today with the current fiscal year overview and talk about a little bit where we anticipate being and then where we are currently in the budget process. So as I mentioned, we had the strategic planning session in February where council got together and set the direction for the city. And from that process, the budget team, which I'll take the time right now to introduce, which are sitting to my right, we've got the short timer, once retired, back for a short stint, Gayla Emery, who is here to get us through this budget cycle. She is going to assist us greatly with her knowledge. And then we will have the long-term staff member, Cindy Lemmer, who is to her right, and then Zach Hafner, which is to the right of Cindy. This is your budget team. Actually, don't get used to seeing Gayla. We are going to let her retire. So this is the budget team that guides us through this process. So
We have no intention of her retiring, so let's just put
Right.
it that way. So
I only have funding for her for a limited time.
Get
so
over
it
thinking
kind of
you're
forces
retiring.
us. Right. So I mentioned the strategic planning session. We then come back with council's direction as the OMB team and solicit from the departments their budget requests. In a given year, we get program control requests or changes to their budget. We go over the revenue sources for each budget, and we go over what the departments need to operate and to satisfy the missions or the priorities that council sets forth. So we call that the second budget down, or the first budget rather, or budget process bullet up there, which is the department budget requests, which are due in February. We then take that information and we compile it into a document balanced against our best guesses for what the revenues are going to be coming in, and we put together our recommendation, talk it over with the city manager, and we come up with what we've got preliminarily for you today, which is the city manager recommended budget. So we bring that to you today, which is the red highlighted section here. We will then take the information or direction that council gives today, and we will go back and we will put that into the more detailed document that the mayor described and give you some advance information before we go into the May 6th budget workshop or budget hearings. We then go take that direction that you have then. Hopefully won't need a meeting on the 13th, but have one calendared just in case. We'll prepare the final budget, and then we go, by law, NRS states that on the third Tuesday in May, cities have to have a budget adoption hearing, so that's why we have that hard date of the 21st. That's our last opportunity to make any changes. And at that time, it's a formal process, which those of you who have been here know. We have the fee resolution, we have the resolution adopting the budget, setting the tax rates, the RDA budgets, things of that nature. So it's a pretty standard and formal process that's baked into that the May 21st date. So current fiscal year, where are we? Well, we're balanced, and that's a good thing. So we see up here the projected through June 30th revenues and expenditures at $166 million. This includes ending fund balance, and it does use stabilization to its fullest in order to get us there. We always anticipate just things changing, whether it's somebody leaves or whatnot. We've got a little bit of savings. So the good news is that we are balanced. We have a little bit of carry forward for next fiscal year, and we are still bumping along at that required 4% goal for our ending fund balance, 4% requirement for the ending fund balance, with our eye on the 8.3% goal, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Breaking down those numbers a little bit in more depth, we're going to look at the current fiscal year revenues. And these revenues are based on the numbers that you have seen in the past and broken out by certain categories, which you are familiar with. And what I'm showing you here is the amended budget, and as you are all aware, we come to you during the process of the budget season or during the budget year and amend that budget frequently. Have council take action, whether we get a grant and have to augment our ability to have budget authority, or we need to make certain expenditures. We come to you and augment that budget. That's the fiscal year 13 amended budget that you see, and then where we project ourselves to be at the end of this fiscal year and the differences. Beginning fund balance, I mentioned. Ad valorem is our property taxes. We augment the budget based on what we get from the assessor, so that's why you see no difference in the numbers that we projected and then the amended budget in that regard, because we track very closely those revenue sources and augment as necessary. C-Tax, we've got, as you can see, we've got some high hopes for how that revenue source is performing, and we'll talk about that one a little bit more in fiscal year 14. But we're looking at seeing some gains in the C-Tax area for this fiscal year, which is helpful. I think we're all seeing the signs that we're starting to kind of climb up out of the hole. I don't know that we've broke ground level yet, but we are on our way out. So licenses and permits, those are liquor, gaming, and business licenses that you see there. We're seeing some increases in that activity in our revenues, which is nice. We have charges for service, which are essentially the city's fees. We've still got some tweaks to do there. We're looking at just under, just a little bit under, relatively flat on those revenues performing for the end of this fiscal year. And then franchise fees, that was a result of a little bit of overzealous budgeting at the beginning of the current fiscal year and where those are performing, but we've realigned those numbers for next fiscal year, so you see those in the slides for 14 a little bit more true to form from what we've seen historically. Let's see here, intergovernmental, those are the grants that we anticipate receiving or have received, and we've got the AB 104 revenue in there. So usually when you see it in a spreadsheet that we have as an internal working document, C-Tax is in that number, so that's why it's a little bit different here. We've got C-Tax broken out for you separately. We jump into fines and forfeitures, and then other miscellaneous, which is kind of our catch basin revenue source. So that includes general fund debt service. We've got the maintenance district revenues in there, the maintenance and police SAD maintenance revenues in there, and some other miscellaneous revenues. So all in all, you see that we're projecting middle column, bottom, 166.1 million for projecting at the end of this fiscal year as far as revenues, which ties back to the graph you just saw previously. And then here's where you see the expenditures of also $166 million. So walking through your expenditures really quickly, you see salaries and wages. That's the result of us being a little bit over on that, or the unanticipated and currently unbudgeted. We've been a couple years out from budgeting adequately for severances, some of the payouts that we are afforded employees to be able to come ask for per their agreements, things of that nature. So we aren't able to budget for those things. So those, even though they are costs of business, those are the things that you see kind of showing us in the red for the current fiscal year. Benefits, we're looking pretty good in that regard, and supplies and services, the departments have been really tough on holding the line continually, again, on supplies and services and where we anticipate being for the end of the fiscal year. We usually have some savings in that area. We're hoping to get to the point where we can actually start tapping into those revenues or those expenditure sources, but we're just still not out of the woods yet. Capital is fire equipment that we purchased. It's right in alignment, nearly flat. And then stabilization, I mentioned, is our go-to fund, kind of our last happenstance fund where we can budget some money so that we have what we've needed to do this year, somewhere to go to should we be falling short from our revenues over expenditures. Some of the other contingencies that you see up there, we have a budget contingency. Council has a contingency that's listed in that number. And we're looking at having that carry. The fund transfers that you see up there are just what it says. We've got the general fund that transfers money into various other funds, and so like the sewer fund, street fund, the debt service fund, things of that nature. So we've got those transfers for a subtotal. Then we add an ending fund balance and show that our total expenditures are also at 166 million. So the message I give to you coming out of the current fiscal year is what you've probably read in the paper, is that I will reiterate that revenues are recovering. I mean, people have come to me and said, things are doing well, the economy is getting better. Why is it that the city is still, struggling and things are still tight? And essentially, revenues are recovering. It's a slow recovery. And we're not seeing, obviously, the boom in revenues as we are the expenditures increasing. And so I reiterate my message from last year, we're not out of the woods yet. We continue to ask folks to hold the line. That's, of course, for our better fiscal stability in the future. We had to utilize stabilization in the current fiscal year. Any gains that we see at the end of the fiscal year obviously will carry forward, but we didn't need to tap into that source for this fiscal year, which is a sign of the times. We are heading into a 2-year budget cycle. We asked departments for the first time to take a look not only ahead to fiscal year 14, but also project out to fiscal year 15, which is a pretty big step for the city of Reno in my mind. We usually had that 1-year window where we weren't really looking past that, but we're trying to be a little more strategically oriented as a city and as our budgeting and fiscal practices. And so we asked departments, please take a look into 15. What are you projecting at this point? So it gives us a little bit more lead time in order to be able to react to the things that are coming not only for the next fiscal year, but the fiscal year following that. So I think that's a good step forward for us. It helps us be less reactionary from year to year, but kind of know what's coming. So that's been interesting. And then, of course, we've got the strategic plan that's going to be coming out in a couple of months. Next, the fiscal year 15 budget will be in tight alignment with that strategic plan. Because of the timing in the council right now, the budget that you'll see in 14 will talk to the strategic plan, but it won't be solely focused around it or have that really clear nexus, because it is kind of a transitional document because of the timing on how those things are rolling out. And then, of course, you'll expect to see for the current fiscal year that we're in, the audit or the comprehensive annual financial report, or the CAFR that we call it, coming in January or February. So that's kind of where we are in the current fiscal year. So good news along those lines. I'm going to look around and see if Mr. Bonenfant is here, and he's not yet. So I will jump into the next couple of slides. Well, actually, why don't I open it up for questions on fiscal 13 until he gets here and we can go over that item.
Of the revenues,
Sure.
that one. No. Okay, the intergovernmental, is that the SAFER grant?
Yes, so the intergovernmental does include the SAFER grant for this current fiscal year.
Okay, so, and it's the 64 and the 8?
It's the 64 and the 10.
And the 10.
And so at the end of this
Okay.
current fiscal year, those 10 positions expire. That
How
first
much-
SAFER grant.
Okay, how much was the intergovernmental as a percentage of that?
You mean the intergovernmental as a percentage of the
Yeah,
whole?
or the SAFER as a percentage of the intergovernmental?
So that would be, let's see here, the intergovernmental that you're, so it's about no.
Is it 10 million?
No, it would be $1 million for the first. I believe it was $1 million for the first. Oh, 8 million, sorry, 8 million for the first one that expires.
Mayor
For
Mayor
the
and
10
council.
positions, sorry. I'm going to pull up.
Let me just jump in for a second. You all have a handout.
Okay.
This handout, this gives you,
The intergovernmental.
it gives you the detail on
Okay.
all of
It
those
doesn't break out
numbers.
the
I mean,
SAFER,
What
unfortunately.
Okay.
Kate has presented here this morning is the summary of this, but if you want to see the detail behind, it should be in everyone's packet. This was in everyone's packet, Kate?
No, they were given that in advance, but they don't have it here today.
Okay.
I've got a couple extra copies if somebody needs one. But.
Well, the point I'm making is we had a meeting with the seniors here the other day, and, the Washoe County's Senior Services Director said, State of Nevada loses federal resources on account of, not being able to come up to the plate on matches. And, there are benchmarks of what intergovernmental is of a local budget, and I'm wondering if we track that and know where we're standing. Do we track that year by year? Because and I guess maybe that's in the performance measures for that function.
Right. So we have obviously oversight of the federal funds that we get in and are in alignment with the practices or the federal standards that are set forth for what percentages those have to be within our budget. We've got, grants and fund development and federal funding is located in OMB. So I've got staff, Maureen McKissick, who helps with that endeavor. So I can get you percentages or get you those standards and let you know where the city is in alignment with those, if that's helpful for the
Well,
six.
it's just a longitudinal understanding of how we do over time. I mean, everyone bumped up during ERA, and now I guess it's petering off. But I guess that was my question. And then on the next slide, the expenditures, the stabilization, that, what happened? Is that our mandated reserve?
No.
That's just a...
No, this is a catch basin, if you will, that we budget in the budget just for circumstances like
Okay.
this. So if there's a place we need to go to tap into, which we have done in the past 5 years. Last year we did not, but we have done this consistently, I think, for 4 years.
It's called it's usually called the contingency, or...
It's a contingency,
Okay,
yes.
okay,
We have contingency
okay.
council, contingency stabilization,
Yeah.
contingency budget, yeah.
Okay, okay. And then can you state the role of the money that is put into deposit of the RTC for the Rosewood Lakes Golf Course? How much money and where that is showing? Is it in our cash end balance, our fund?
So you're not going to see that in the budget right now. It's in a restricted fund.
Okay.
It does show in our cash performance.
Okay.
But it's not showing as a budgeted line item because there are restrictions around how that has to sit on our books. So it's the $7.5 million that you're talking about that's essentially part of our cash flow, if you will, but it's not something we've expended against.
So it's not the ending fund balance?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it doesn't show up in.
Okay. And then the fund transfers of 10 million, how many of those, what percentage is debt service and debt service in and outside of the RDA?
I don't have that number on the top of my head
Okay.
right now. I can certainly pull that together for you for the
Okay.
6th.
Because those fund transfers, you know, in theory, the general fund is going out into revenue funds then, right? Because if they're going to sewer or...
Yeah, this is general fund expenditures into those various other funds.
And if I might jump in, Mr. Mayor, and Council, Councilwoman Breckus, to your question on the fund transfers, those are transfers to debt service, and again, they're on that
Okay.
detailed sheet that we gave
Okay.
you. The biggest one, when you look in there, is the transfer to the event center. That's the C-tax backing on the
Okay.
event center
Okay.
bonds. And I will note that in fiscal year 13, that number is 3 million, but because we are refinancing those bonds, that number actually drops to 2 million when we get into 14. So there's actually $1 million savings there from 13 to 14 because of that refinancing that we're doing on the downtown event center bonds to reduce our interest rate and reduce our costs. So that is the biggest piece of that $10 million in fund transfers. There are other debt service transfers in there, transfers to RDA. And so we can get you
Okay.
the detail in that sheet.
I mean, I'm trying to, you know, frame my questions today in kind of big picture understanding how the mechanics work, really. And that fund transfer for me is of interest because it shows how much debt has been taken on essentially by the general fund in lieu of, you know, other sort of things. So that's, okay.
The one thing I'll point out, though, is that is not all debt service.
No,
That
it's
is transferred to other funds. For example, it includes transfers to the street fund is included in there, so it's not just debt service, but we can break that out
Yep.
for you.
We can get that for you.
Ms. Jordan?
Just a couple of quick questions. I noted in the licenses and permits section that there was a pretty decent uptick in that section. Is that due to a volume shift or price change in permit amounts or a combination of both?
My understanding is that activity is picking up in that area, and I don't believe we've adjusted our fees significantly in any of those, so it's not attributed to that. We've got, in 14, you'll see some of the franchise fees increasing from a natural increase, but I don't believe that's the case in these. It is, from my understanding, it's a volume issue,
That's
which is a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, if I could follow up on that.
Okay, we'll get them for the 6th.
Hey, Kate, you mentioned that on the 22nd or 21st, we adopt the fee resolution.
Right.
When are we going to see the fee, you know, even the existing fee resolution, you know, to be able to study it in time for maybe the 6th?
Yeah, I can provide that for you in
Okay.
advance of the 6th. We've actually reformatted the entire thing, so it'll be a little more legible.
The other things with regards to the fines and forfeitures, and that's down 1.7 million. Can we attribute that largely to the parking kiosk issue and enforceability issues, or what?
That's a piece of it. We had over budgeted on traffic enforcement, but yes, we are seeing ramifications from the parking situation.
Yeah, I just to jump in here again, Mr. Mayor and Council, the biggest portion of that is traffic fines. And just to give you an example, it's not that traffic fines are down this year. It's in fiscal year 12, traffic fines were 1.5 million. In 13, we actually budgeted those at 2.9, and we have since adjusted that back down to 1.5 million. So that's why you see the large change from the amended budget to the projected budget, is because we're adjusting those traffic fines based on an actual trend.
Why the big uptick?
Why
up to 2.9?
I think we were a bit optimistic.
Yeah, it was done during the
13 on
budget
that
process.
revenue.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Two more points. The salaries and wages you talked about, and I've seen this to a degree with regards to cash flow, with regards to severance and payouts. Can you tell me what the range is? Let's say you have an officer or a fireman that's retiring, and he or she is going to cash out their sick and vacation that they have accumulated. Can you give me some averages on what those amounts are?
Boy, it really depends on the level or the position. I mean, they range anywhere from, very, very little to, we've seen them upwards of $100,000. So that's not the average by any means, but again, those are unbudgeted expenditures that we see when somebody leaves. So, it's, like I said, it just depends on the caliber of person that retires, and, the higher up you are and the more overtime you accumulate or whatnot, it depends.
And we can bring that information back or send it to council on sort of what the averages are and what the range is. Because Kate's right, it does vary depending on the level of pay that you're at, your accumulated leave when you leave. Several variables, but some of them can be, relatively high.
Yeah.
When you
It's a big hit.
cash flow hit,
But
for sure.
from a practice perspective, what we do ask is that those positions be held open as long as possible to try to cover any of those severance costs, to recover some of those costs. So by practice, that's something that we have been utilizing to try to offset those numbers.
Thank you. And the last thing that I have is I believe it was we just got a memo on it last night, the council members did. In 2004, the council put into place an automatic CPI increase for council salaries, which is resulting this year in about a 1.7% increase. And we'll get into discussing how in which we,
Correct.
whatever the appetite of the council is to give that back, because I know there's procedurally how you do it. But how do we go about, if the council's appetite was to remove that automatic CPI increase, what would that look like? How do we go about doing that?
And I'll look to Tracy as well, but I believe council could adopt a new resolution, but you can't, my understanding is you cannot affect the salary of the current sitting council members. What you could do, though, as a council member is, I know most of the council members receive a car allowance and a cell allowance. Now, you can give those up, which would then offset the cost of those increases.
Which I understand, and we'll have those conversations. But my question is, you get those and then you can give it back, but it's post-tax. But with regards to this automatic CPI increase, how would we go about stopping that automatic increase for council?
Well, you could pass a new resolution that would change that, but it would only affect newly elected members of the council. So it wouldn't affect the pay while you're here in your term.
It wouldn't affect any of us, but it would affect future people.
Yeah, but you could do that.
But it's the same thing with what happened in 2004, is kind of tying our hands a little bit with how we give that money back now, the process. So I'm wondering how, looking forward and looking a little more long-term, how we can have more flexibility in waiving or not receiving that more easily. Because right now, from what I understand, it's kind of a difficult process to...
Mr. Mayor, Tracy Chase, Reno City Attorney's Office. In the charter revisions that are currently pending before the legislature, we have put in language that will allow you to do that. So hopefully that issue will be streamlined for you very shortly.
If they don't pass it, we can only affect future people.
Yeah. But we could, when we adopt the budget, have a side resolution that would eliminate the escalator, and that would affect the new 3 coming on in 2 years. And if any of us have the good fortune to be reelected in 4 years, it would hit us and would go. So the escalator could be on the budget for the 21st then. But we do need to see how those changes are coming out. I can't recall. She sent me that draft last night, and I didn't look at that provision.
Tracy Chase, Reno City Attorney's Office. The current charter indicates that council can't change your salary while you're holding the office. So the resolution itself was a formula-based resolution so that you wouldn't do any action to change the salary. The resolution formula-wise would change the salary automatically. So what you could do if the language doesn't go through the legislature is you can donate it back or you can give it back individually still through a donation back to the city. But Council Member Jardon is accurate that that is post-tax. So hopefully our legislative change will go through the system for you.
If we get this legislation, we can do it automatically.
But I will just clarify, though, that if you give up the allowances, you do pay tax on those allowances, and if you give them up, you will not pay taxes on them.
Andrew, can we allocate that money to where we want it to go specifically in the budget?
You can give it to any charity, you can give it to community foundation, you can do anything like that.
Okay. We have a time certain item for 9:30, I believe. Brian's here, but I don't think we can hear the item before 9:30 since we've posted it on the agenda. So if there are no more questions, I can jump into a general overview of 14 if that's helpful. He's here, but.
Okay.
Or you can take a break. It's at the council's discretion.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm sorry I have to fast forward through Brian's slideshow here because I built it into the one that we're using. Sorry, Brian, I'm giving everybody a sneak peek of your slideshow. So I'll jump into a couple of the overview slides until 9:30, and then we can go into the economic review for the region. But I wanted to start off our discussion of fiscal year 14 with an overview of sort of where the revenues are pictorially and graphically versus where the expenditures are, and then show you how the breakouts are by department. And so the graph that you see, or the pie chart that you see in front of you now, shows essentially the large portions of revenues that come into the city and satisfy the general fund. And so we've got, in my mind, I always compartmentalize them into three areas: ad valorem, or our property tax, which is about $43 million. And then we've got the C-tax number, which is about, I'm sorry, ad valorem we've got at 42.6, C-tax 43.4, so they're right around the same number. And then I combine in my mind, the orange and the red pieces of franchise fees and licenses and permits, and that's another $42 million. So if you think of the three large revenue sources that come into the city, that's sort of how you break them down. You can see that there's other items on there, intergovernmental, for example, with the grant funding. And then we've got charges for services, which are our fees. So this is a general overview of where the revenues are for the city.
With the great property tax depreciation, did ad valorem say in, the part of the century, early part of the century, was that a bigger chunk way back when, like up around 30%, 35%?
I believe it was. Now, I don't know how that proportionally balanced out with C-tax, because when things were booming, they were booming, right? So proportionally, they may have all been a shared piece of the pie. The number itself that's behind that percentage might have been larger, but I will find out. And maybe we should do an historical overview of ad valorem for you.
Yeah,
that'd be helpful.
Because, there's a lot of discussion about in the RDA and the residential is we're not going to see ad valorem increase because it's the cap. And C-tax has better potential because it doesn't have this restriction on it. And the legislature studied C-tax last time, and there's talk about studying ad valorem next time. Mm-hmm. And, we would want to be at the table if that's studied. And so having an understanding from our own, situation would be helpful.
Absolutely. Okay. So from an expenditure standpoint, those revenues are then put into various areas, and you can see that the large percent, and this is very typical for a local government, the large percent of where those expenditures go are towards salaries and benefits or personnel costs. And so when times are tough and you're down to the bare bones, there's very little you can do. We're happy to present the 14 budget without any reductions in the number of personnel, but as you can see, you have very little wiggle room when it comes to the things that you can control based on the way that the expenditures are listed here. And you can see the expenditures listed the same way that you saw them in those tables by the general categories and what percentages they are of the whole pie. And then we've broken out further for you to give you a pictorial of how this looks from department to department. Obviously, we have a huge focus, and city services are centered largely around public safety services. And so you can see that here, that of the expenditures that we have, you can see them broken out by department. Some of them, I think, poor civil service shows at 0. It's not that we don't give them any, it's just that their number was so small that it didn't generate a 1 in our graph when we put that together. But this gives you an idea or an overview of how it looks. I'll point out that ComTech is not a huge, robust department. It's just that that's where all of our software fees and all of those software hardware costs land. So though they are small but mighty, they do make up a pretty significant piece of that pie because of the support that we need to have on technology, because as we are a smaller organization, we have to rely more on that source. Okay, I'm trying to delay of game as much as I can for 9:30, but I'll give you the sneak shot at 14, showing you that and the number is as of April 23rd. You'll see it reflected in the presentation that goes up on CORE or on the website after this, but the projection is as of April 23rd, not 3rd. But again, we are showing a balanced budget with slightly more revenues coming in over expenditures. There's not a lot of wiggle room in there, about $700,000, but the point being that as we head into the fiscal year, we've got a balanced budget, which is great. I will then go into detail, which you all are aware of how we got to that balanced budget number by modifying our expenditures and some of the cuts or reductions for the fiscal year 14 that we were recommending that be made. And so, but before I get into that detail level, because that's going to involve quite a bit of discussion, I'm going to let Brian Bonenfant come up and give you all the regional economic overview so that you can have a sense, sort of coming out of 13, where we stand from a regional perspective on where things are heading, give you a little bit more sense as we delve into 14 before we make any decisions around that. So, back up.
Brian, you have to stretch for just a minute because we've got 2 more minutes before you can start.
Legally?
Legally. But other than that, who cares? Go.
Okay. Good morning, members of the board, mayor, city manager. I was invited to, my name is Brian Bonifant, project manager for Center for Regional Studies at UNR. I was invited to cover the latest economic indicators, and without delay, I will get right into employment. This shows employment by month through March 2013. Your yellow bars are January, your blue bars are December to show the seasonality. Right now, as of March 2013, we're at 189,100. That's a 1.2% increase, or 2,200 jobs since March of 2012. We're 3,100 jobs up from March 2011. It's the highest March number since 2009, but we're still 39,000 off the peak, which was December 2006. Unemployment rate, we're at 10% as of March. We were in the single digit in December at 9.9, but because of seasonality, we're back up above that mark, but we're almost 2 percentage points down from March 2012, so unemployment is shrinking. Again, the seasonality, almost 9,000 jobs between January and December 2012. That's a strong seasonal growth. We haven't had that growth since 2006, so it's good numbers on that also. I got you. Here's another perspective on employment change. This again is by month, and it's the volumetric employment change in the Reno Sparks MSA. I should Pointed that out last slide, but Reno Sparks MSA includes Washoe and Story County based on journey to work patterns and shopping and other indicators. But this shows month over month that the yellow bar, again, is January. 11 straight months of employment growth in the Reno Sparks MSA all the way through March. So 2012 really was an indicator of employment recovery. Another way to look at employment is averaging the annuals, average annual employment, which is the black horizontal bars. 2008, we lost 9,000 jobs. 2009, we lost 10,000 jobs. 2010, we lost 5,000 jobs. 2011, we lost 1,000 jobs. 2012 has finally turned that over, and we gained 1,500 jobs. That 1,500 jobs annual versus 2011 is only a 0.7% increase, that 1,500 uptick, whereas that March was a 1.2 over March last year. Department of Employment, or the chief economist, Bill Anderson at Dieter, they've been projecting a 1 to 1.5% employment projection increase on an annual basis. And now the last roundtable we had with Andrew, Bill said that his numbers, he's getting more confident to push that up to a 1.5 to 2%. At 1.5%, it would take us 13 years to recover to the peak, and at 2%, it will take us 10 years to recover to that peak. Just to give you some gauge on that. The sectors increased. This is a March, again, in the Reno MSA. If you look on their website, you're going to see local government grew by 1,600 jobs. So I called Dieter up on that. I said, you know, this doesn't look right. And they said, you're right. It's a double count. They screwed up their benchmarking, but they're not going to go in there and fix it until the next benchmark. And so you're going to be seeing that you guys grew twice as much as you did. Some footnote on that is last fall, you guys were showing, you know, a less 800, 900 less. So you just recovered what you lost last fall. So don't let that throw you up top. Leisure hospitality, we've been watching that for a year and a half, 2 years. Very interesting, very intriguing. Casino hotels and all accommodation, which is a subsector of leisure and hospitality, they've been losing jobs, okay? And then the bars and restaurants, which is another subsector of leisure and hospitality, they've been gaining jobs, but it's not them that's the reason why leisure hospitality has been increasing. It's actually arts, entertainment, and recreation. So that sector, which is non-casino hotel and non-bars and restaurant, that's the sector we've been watching for the last year, over the year, growing in jobs. That's been the leading sector. And to us, that's intriguing because that's a discretionary income sector. Those are items you do not absolutely need. Here's the ones that decreased by sector, you know, Sparks MSA. Professional and business services, we've been watching bleeding over the last year. That concerns us. Those are high wage type of jobs. Those are not good. The rest, you know, warehousing, mining, education, health services, those are traditionally strong sectors in our region. But again, this is 1 month of reporting, so we got to be careful with reading too much into the 1 month stuff. Oh, thank you. So we go back and we pull out these 1 month and we stretch it and we smooth it into some back to annual averages. And this is almost 11 years of data. It's through third quarter 2012. This covers the 5-county region, Carson, Lyon, Story, Washoe, Douglas. And this looks at it, we take down and break down the jobs more into these individual sectors. So we take education and healthcare and we peel those apart so we can show individual sectors. And it's kind of interesting. It shows what's happened to our economy over the 10 years in the region. The lime green on the left in 2002, which led all employment, that's casino hotels. Now you're seeing they're down to number 3 in 2012, losing over 10,000 jobs. Number 2 back in 2002 was retail. They peaked with the housing bubble, and since the recession they've lost. Retail is now number 2 in 2012 in the region. Retail is getting hit by the internet, by online sales. I don't know if you've read, but on Monday, the U.S. Senate voted to debate on a bill for online taxes. And they're unsure if the House is going to be able to pass that, but we feel that's coming, and that will help the retail sector regionally if that does happen. Number 3 in 2002 was healthcare, And that's been the creeper of the decade, and that's going to be the future of our region. And you see in 2012, we just ran these numbers, they now have exceeded retail. They are now the #1 sector in our region for employment. In fact, I ran through a newspaper on April 14th, a big ad, half-page ad for hiring at St. Mary's. These are all skilled labor jobs. So these are good jobs. Healthcare is going to be a good thing for employment. Going back down to the number 4, just wanted to point out was manufacturing, the red line in 2002. There's still number 4, although they lost during the recession. Number 5 in 2002 ranking was construction. That's the orange one that you see peak with the prior to the recession kicked in. They follows the housing bubble actually. They are now construction is now number 10 in the region as far as employment by ranking. So employment's recovered. So no more jobs, more spending, and that parlays into more consumption. This is taxable sales. This is by quarter. The blue bars is Washoe County compared to Clark, which is the green, and then states, red. The white is all balance of counties, all other counties besides Washoe and Clark. They've been doing gangbusters out in the rurals, as you can see. But Washoe, even though we had a 1% decrease in the fourth quarter, the third quarter was so strong that we're still, fiscal year to date, we're still 8% above the previous period. So that's good news. On a national scale, they expect a strong first quarter, a strong GDP, 2.5%, but weak second and a weak third quarter in consumption and retail sales. So we could see stuff come, the sales percent growth drop back down. In fact, the Economic Forum that projects the revenues for the state, they're running about 2 to 4% projections, and that's about where it probably will come in for the fiscal year. Right now we're at 8%, as it's shown. The prior fiscal we're 4.5%, and the fiscal before that was 2%. But 6 straight quarters, before fourth quarter, we had 6 straight quarters of taxable sales increases. So consumption's been good. This is data through January that we have from taxation, and on the left bottom, as far as volumetric, the top volumetric increases, general merchandise, sporting goods, and bars and restaurants. Sporting goods was driven by the Safari Club. That's your 5.5 million uptick. That's about what you're looking at is what you're going to lose, or what that sector is going to lose with the loss of Safari Club is about 5 million impact. And then on the right is these are the overall grossing sectors for taxable sales. And those 3, bars and restaurants, motor vehicles, and general merchandise, are always usually the top 3 month to month to month. So you've got this employment growth in leisure and hospitality. You've got a lot of consumption in bars and restaurants, the retail sales. And you would think some of this would parlay into gaming. Well, it's not. I mean, this shows the dark blue, Washoe County's the dark blue, and taxable gaming revenue. This is a little bit different than gaming win, but it's more important to local governments. But you've got 22 quarters of no growth. And that goes way back. That's over that's 5.5 years for Washoe County. So all this uptick in leisure, hospitality, and bars and restaurants, it's not parlaying into gaming. But if you look at the bottom little footnote, 62% they surveyed on Las Vegas Strip is everything but gaming for their revenue. Lodging, retail, food, drink, entertainment. So the hotel casinos are not done. If they can figure out this new behavior change, the new demographics, and get with kind of the Vegas model as far as the entertainment and shopping and that kind of stuff, they can kind of get off the gaming leverage. First quarter might come in. The first quarter might be that first pop, because February was 2.7, January was 2.1. So if March comes in with a somewhat healthy 2-3%, first quarter could show a growth in gaming taxable revenue. Another look at kind of the behavior of casino hotels, which is cash, the annual change in cash occupied hotel rooms. We've taken out the comps by the casinos, and we've taken out the motels. It could be weeklies, so we're just looking at cash occupied hotels over the 6 years. And as you see, downtown Reno in the red, Sparks in green, and suburban Reno in blue. They've been struggling for the last 4 or 5 years, but look what's not struggling, and it's the non-gaming hotels, the yellow. Population estimates, July 1, 2012, 427,704. We finally surpassed the 2008 number, 423,833, after losing population 2009, which was the first time Washoe County has lost population since 1960 when we closed the Stead Air Force Base. And since then, we had real flat 2010 and even in 2011 pop growth. Prior to the crash, we were running 2.7% annually on a growth, and in 2012, and now we're back 1.4. The drivers of this population growth is in the green bars, and it's primarily the 20 to 24-year-olds and 60 to 74-year-olds that are driving the population growth in Washoe County. This shows the trends 7 to 11, the most current data. But besides the 25 to 29-year-olds, which is 6.6%, the rest of those age cohorts are really flat or decreasing. So it's really that Gen Y and that baby boomers that are really driving the population growth. And as far as mobility or in-migration, we've been showing IRS data of in-migration patterns. And the reason why we lost population is not really because everybody that moved out, because we've had more people move out in 2006 when our median house price was $350K than we had people move out in 2009 when we lost population. The actual reason why we're losing population is the in-migration. The in-migration spigot turned off, and that was a nationwide effect because of the recession. People couldn't sell their houses or they couldn't find jobs, so nobody moved. But so now we're tracking, the economy's recovering. People are able to sell their homes, so now we're tracking this mobility. The blue lines, so you got movement in 20 to 30 and 40-year-olds. But the big surprise, or the most significant age group, is that 65, 69, 215% between 07 and 11, and that's basically the effect of the baby boomer generation and the size of that population. And again, now the economic recovery, they can sell their homes in California, and so we're going to see that growth. And as far as the impacts on you guys or the local governments, is are they going to be wards of their family, or are they going to be wards of the state when they get here? We don't know that. You got to get in those households and find out about those characteristics. Into some housing data, AB 284. I think we all know what that did to the inventory. This blue line is the NODs, or the notice of defaults in Washoe County by month through March. We went from 600 NODs in September 11 down to 13 NODs on October, and that's when 284 kicked in. But now you see on the right side, we've got 4 straight months of NODs at 200 per month. So we're at half of what we were before 284. So you're starting to see the banks figure out 284. 284 is in the legislative session, kind of getting tweaked. They want to take the criminality out of it and give some judges more flexibility. So we expect that to be cleaned up. We expect the distressed stuff to start to pump back through. And the red line is your actual foreclosures. That's about a 6-month lag between the NOD and the foreclosure happening. So with those uptick in the blue on the right, you got a few months before you start seeing the foreclosures uptick. More than half the households are still underwater. But what we don't know is how the banks are going to be treating this in the future. Are they going to modify? Are they going to work with the owners? Are they going to short sale it? We don't, are they going to go back to the foreclosure old model? So that's going to be something we're going to be watching after the session gets out. And of course, that shrinkage of an existing inventory has risen the prices across the board for all product. The red is your bank-owned resales, the blue is short sales, the black is your overall median values, and the green are the non-distressed. This is all single-family homes in just Washoe County by month through March. And you see everything ramping up in the sales. Short sales, the word on the street, the short sales is really difficult to process and get through and buy a house. You hear that from a lot of people, but for years since the crash happened, 33% of the sales have been short sales. Bank-owned in September 11, bank-owned 37% of all sales in September 11 when 284 kicked in there. Now we're looking at only 8%. And so that's what's really driving up those prices, because the bank-owned stuff was the cheapest, as you can see the red line on the bottom. And of course, the product that benefits the most from all this is the non-distressed, and they're way up there now. And this shows single-family, the bubble, before the crash, or before the peak, after the peak. And this is the greater Reno-Sparks area, takes out Incline Village. But the blue line is what we track from 1990 to 2001, which is a 4% per year appreciation rate in our area. There was not a lot of deviation from that in that time span. And then you see it take off to 350K in the end of 2005. This is just the existing market, doesn't include the new home sales. But then you see the drop. We're now at 190. It's first quarter 2012. Last 3 quarters, the percent changes over the prior year have been between 16% and 31%. First quarter was a 31% change. So things are really ramping up, except if you compare it to where we should be, which is the blue line, we're still about 65,000 undervalued, according to this graph. This is just new single family in Washoe County. The bars are the number of sales. The yellow bars are for January. This is through February. And then the red line is the median values of the new single family product. You see in 2012 that you know, with the struggle with the existing market, the new single family market has stepped in with more sales. You can see that in the latter part of 2012. And if you look at the January, February, the last 2 bars on the right, which is 2013, if you compare that all the way across to the yellow lines, we're doing as much as we were in 2008 now for January and February. So things are really strong for the new single-family market, but they've got to be careful because they don't know what's going to go on with 284 in the existing market and how that's going to affect them. What they do have, there's a lot of forces with the new single-family market because now you got the economy recovering, you got the mobility returning, so they're kind of in between with the 284 existing market mess and the mobility economic recovery on the other side. We expect them, they did 46 per month in 2012, which was the best mark since 2009. 546 sales. We expect them to do about 700 plus in 2013, based on January and February. And so that's going to be a strong, semi-strong year for them. Real fast with the multifamily market, doing really well. It surprises us with so much cash sales happening in the existing market. So many single families being bought and rented out that the multifamily hasn't really taken a hit. Anything around 5% vacancy rate, which is your vertical bars, is very healthy. And the rent rates is in your red line. They really haven't spiked up. That usually follows a low vacancy rate usually figures into a high rent rate, but we haven't really seen that. And so. But again, we got to caveat the data. This is self-reported information from those properties, that are doing well and they want to report their successes. You've got a lot of multifamily product out there that are not going to self-report because their vacancies aren't that great. So we got to caveat that. Lastly, we don't really think that the housing market and the overall economy has reached that recovery or the full recovery point until we start seeing that sales happen in the upper value range, and that we're talking 300K for a single-family house and higher. We want to see that activity rise before we think there's a full housing recovery and economic recovery in the region. And I want you to look at the percent total next to 2010 versus the percent total next to 2012. So between 10 and 12, and the percent of those sales by price range, in 2012 were all less than 2010. The amount of 300K and higher percentage-wise were all less. So we didn't see any recovery in that upper end market in 2012. Through March 2013, the lower graph, we are starting to see that. We were told by Dixon Realty, Nancy Fennell, to watch out. Stuff's coming, especially January, February. So we've been running it, looking in there, and if you look at the percent total for those colored up lines, you see that activity happen. It's finally happening, as they said. So we hope that continues. The million and greater, 44 in 2012, so that's less than 4 per month. In 2013, through 3 months, you're almost running 10 homes per month for a million and greater. And so for us, that's the signs of of a strong recovery, because when you sell these homes, then that parlays into spending, into furniture, bars and restaurants, entertainment activity. That's the disposable income that we want to see in the region. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I can take them.
Questions? Ms. Zadra?
Thank you, Brian. These numbers are always pretty attention-getting. I was going to say frightening, but we'll just call it attention-getting. Can you parallel, I think it was like your fourth slide, the employment increases by sector, and the 3.9% that is the leisure and hospitality, and you specifically spoke to that as being arts, entertainment, and recreation, not the bars, restaurants, and casino, which we certainly have been hearing for some time. But then when we move over and look at the sales tax, those are actually combined, correct? The arts, entertainment, and restaurant and bars are kind of combined. We don't have as much of a detailed breakout or opportunity to break out the sources from which those revenues are coming, correct? On the
No,
sales
you
tax
can
side?
break them out. You can separate them. The issue with leisure and hospitality is a lot of it's service-based, and there's no taxes, no sales taxes on the service-based. So when you get into the taxable sales, it's only on the retail, on the tangible product. And so they do have bars and restaurants separated. Accommodation, it would only be for the gift store and that kind of stuff. So it's hard to marry up the employment by sector with the taxable sales by sector, because taxes operate different. Employment captures everybody, every sector. Taxable only captures certain sectors.
Is there any comparison, or can you factor in a ratio of per employee, so that 3% increase? Is there any kind of a ratio that you can factor in? Every employee results in X number of dollars generated tax-wise?
You could take a shot at that, and I would do it with payroll. I would look at the payroll changes and trends. In fact, with this ACA Act coming, a lot of people are gonna take employment below 30 hours, so they don't have to meet that eligibility, and then hire more on. And so we expect them possibly seeing a little bit of bumps in the employment based on the ACA Act. And so we may, for us to look at the trends of how employment, we may need to get off employment because of the ACA Act and look at payroll, because we're expecting employment to bump a little bit, but payroll will be flat based on the ACA. Because the employment data through DETR, they don't report FTE, which is full-time equivalent. They don't care if it's 20, 30, 40, whatever. If you got a employee, then there's one, and that's how they report it. There's no tracking at the state of FTE. And so, the employment's going to bounce around because of the ACA, but the payroll will not. And so that's what we're going to have to move into. But the payroll, we can turn around and look at payroll. Basically, the amount of payroll is, 80, 90, 95% of their budget, of their revenue, of the expenditures based on the revenue. So you can look at that and parlay that payroll into the sales. And that's what we do a lot when you do the economic impacts for these non-retail sectors that don't report to taxation.
Right.
So it's payroll.
Where I'm trying to get is, at our discussion on the 6th, we may find ourselves in a discussion of where do we provide more of our support? Is it special events, or is it the arts and culture side? So I would look for that kind of detail to help validate if we need to make that, if we need to have that kind of discussion and make those kinds of decisions, some credible analysis into just a oversimplified example, but to kind of help you where I'm going. Can we identify the kind of revenue generated from people coming to town for a Baryshnikov performance versus people coming to town for a crawl under the arch?
It's a very good question. We're building a survey team right now up at UNR and discussion with RCBA about doing exactly that, putting students with iPads into the events and calculating budgets, right? You know, historically, for all the special events, the way that's been calculated is RCVA has done an annual survey of all visitors online, not event-specific, and then they take that budget and they apply it to some sort of estimated attendance, usually by the vendor. And so things go sideways real quick with that methodology. So we're trying to improve that, and we really want to identify for these special events, what are the benefits?
And how do we validate that? The Baryshnikov guest is likely staying overnight as well.
Yep.
Probably 3 people per room, not 7, and having dinner and cocktails at $400, well, I'm exaggerating, a $60 bottle of wine versus a $3 beer. So how do you equate that?
You got to ask them. You have to survey each event, and you got to talk to the people that are attending that, and you got to ask them how much you spend on food and drink, how much you spend on gaming, are you lodging commercially or at a friend's house? You got to pick that all apart, and with the questions, and you got to do it, you know, in a proper sampling way, and then that's how you compare event to event. You got to get into the specific events, and that's what we plan on doing. That's what we're working with RCVA on.
But we don't have any kind of data on that currently.
No.
So it's
you know,
empirical
within the
observation.
city coffers, you know, there's some of that data privy to you guys, but we haven't seen anything.
But we did budget for this year through special
I
events
understand.
to have the
But-
Santa Crawl.
And I'm happy that we'll see that for a future budget process. We don't have that data to support those decisions that could be in front of us in 2 weeks.
You don't, and we've been waving that flag for over 10 years, saying you don't have that data. You need that data. Special events with the Indian gaming was kicking in 10 years ago plus. We said special events is what we need to focus on, and we've got to get this dialed. The events have to get dialed, and for the local governments, they got to know what, you know, the revenue versus expenditures. What's the cost to them versus the revenues to them, and that's what needs. Once you get the benefit, the revenue. You know, that's great. That's the first step. But the second step is what are the costs to the local governments to hold these events? And that stuff we've been, you know, wondering why we can't get at that and get those numbers resolved for a long time. And so we're working on that right now. But it takes time. It's a difficult process.
Can you make an educated guess? I mean, in the casino industry, you get a P&L every single day. Any large business does. And you have factors that you speculate could have affected that. The pass was closed for 6 hours, so, you know, that's why we probably saw the drop of 78%. We had this event in town, that's probably why we saw the increase of 3. Baryshnikov was in town, we probably saw the increase of 7. Can you make those kinds of educated guesses looking at daily impacts or weekly impacts?
Sure. I mean, once we collect that data, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot of.
You couldn't currently, you couldn't go back.
No, right now, no way. Mm-mm. No.
And good job. You know, you always do a really good job. I think, you know, that conversation you had about payroll versus employment is really critical in the recovery. I just was looking at a Washington Post article, 58% of jobs nationwide that have been created post-recovery are low wage, you know, part-timers,
Part-time.
no benefits. So the composition of the workforce is changing, and it'd be interesting to track our composition of job recovery, you know, along the national. And I don't know if anyone's starting to do that, or if you're seeing anything. You know, are we gaining more low-wage jobs than the nation as a whole? Which is, I don't know, have you been thinking about that and the nature of our job recovery?
We're always so focused locally and regionally that you know, compared to U.S. is like the last thing, but it brings up an interesting point. We had a slide of showing the employment recovery. I think you've all seen it on the national level versus all the recessions we've had, and it showed our most current recession is we're way lagging versus the other recessions, and they were only about 3% off the peak right now, and we're a lot more, 15-20% off the peak still. So we're lagging, as we all expected, and they've all said that Nevada would be one of the last ones to come back. Everybody that had the housing bubble is going to be the last one to come back. All those construction jobs and associated jobs are done, and so that's a good analysis to be made, is to look at those wages and those type of jobs. If we're looking at leisure and hospitality, I don't expect them to be high wage. And that's what's been pumping the
Yeah.
region for the last year, and I don't expect that to be very high wage. You're losing business and professional services, high wage. But again, it's the healthcare, which is going
Yeah.
to be a higher wage. That could be our savior, but that's a nationwide phenomena. And it's not just us. So that's what, that's what the EDONs are doing and what everybody's trying to get these high-paying, high-impact jobs to the region, and it's high tech
Yeah.
and education. And
Yeah.
right now, we're doing a lot of data, we're kind of transferring to a lot of data centers, call centers, and so all this casino, hotel employment, construction employment really has to be retooled into the skills of communication, of call centers. And that's where it's all kind of at. If you look at that, this thing is all about, where am I at? Education. Look at the drastic changes, and that's how the education, UNR, TMCC, high schools, they have to start following these trends, and we need to, where are we going, and where do we want to be? And that's kind of how we got to retool our education system, is based on these trends.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. My other question is, what was Washoe County's count date? Did it flatline or?
The enrollment?
Yeah. 'cause
It was really flat, very, very
was very
flat.
flat,
Like
so they're still on.
0.01 or so. It was super flat.
okay.
Last couple of years, they've been really flat.
Yeah.
They lost also in 2009 along with the population.
Okay. Okay,
yeah.
because there's a bill, and we've been talking about the bills to fund them for their capital, and I was just wondering what they're saying. And then, is there a data set on the historical difference between new sales and old sales, and what the differential is? Because you've got the slide, you characterize what the sale numbers are for new product coming on.
Yeah.
But I've always wondered if there's a differential, and this gets into property tax and other sort of, market trends, between new and old. Is that margin always been 15, 20%? Has it moved over time? Have you ever thought about a data set comparing those two?
We have the data. We can run whatever number you
Yeah.
want on comparing those two products. We've got it going way back, and we've been tracking this for a long time.
Yeah.
Not really have ever compared it, seen the predictiveness
margin.
of yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering, because I've always wondered about that. And then my last question is, the multifamily, that comes out of the Johnson Perkins work.
Correct.
And those are the large properties.
Correct.
I don't know if they include the large inventory of subsidized housing on there too. I don't think
highly
they do.
doubt it.
I've always felt that is not a real reliable number, because our housing, our rental multifamily is so much, particularly where I represent, the duplexes, the triplexes, the sixplexes. These only represent like the 200 units or above, right?
They're the significant properties for sure.
Yeah, so I've always, in trying to understand, particularly as you look to see how strong the rental versus ownership,
Right.
Psychology of populations are changing in our society,
Yep.
is that I think this number needs to be beefed up in a methodology way to capture other functions.
The reason why we use it is because it is somewhat some primary data. They go and collect it, self-reported, sure. The only other source of the information is the Census Bureau, and it's that ACS data, which is a high sample rate, 1 in 44, and they're saying 17.5% vacancy rate in multifamily for Washoe County. And so those are the two ends of the spectrum. This one, and yeah, you got to put the caveat on the source and how this is generated, but we look at the trends. How is it moving? Is it moving up and down? And not really the actuals of what that quarter did, because we know that this is self-reported. It doesn't include all the properties, but how is it trending? We do absolutely believe that the vacancy rate is much higher than 5%. But for significant properties, and this goes into construction, that people are going to build new, they really care about the significant properties and how they are moving, and they really don't care about the subsidized and that kind of
Yeah,
product.
but to put it into us over here, as
Sure.
we look to Midtown and other areas, and 10
Yeah.
years ago we had a council had a discussion about whether or not to allow accessory dwelling units on single-family lots, and decided not to. And so it's a housing inventory issue that comes to, as a public policy to us. So that's why I raise that. but.
Sure. Yeah, we know, and the Census Bureau is reporting a lot more rental than ownership. You know, that's boosted up, of course, because of the recession.
Ms. Jordan?
So I can draw from at least from your population numbers, that the focus on incoming demographics are seniors and students.
Correct.
Correct. I want to get your opinion on, you talked about the real indicator that we have kind of gotten past a certain level of the recession is when the homes in the 750 and above start to move, and you did get one local indicator telling you that's happening. What is your thoughts on the Zillow and Trulia numbers that they put out there? Because in watching those, they are most certainly indicating that that market is definitely moving, but I always question the validity of those numbers from those two.
I question validity on every number you hear. The Zillow and that kind of stuff, that's good, you know, 30,000, 10,000 foot, you know, that's good to kind of give you general comparison of region and trending. But you know, when you get in that due diligence phase, if you're actually trying to do some projections or predicting or buying or development, then you want to get into the actuals. You want to get into the, you know, all of our stuff comes from either MLS or assessor data. And so it's the actual sales that were recorded. Those are the values. Here's the product. Here's the owner. And so we don't use it. We don't ever use the Zillow or that kind of stuff. It's like using the MapQuest stuff. If you're trying to go somewhere, you can get lost and possibly die in a snowbank. And so that's kind of the, you know, if you want to use the Zillow 30,000 off the shelf stuff, you know, do it with risk. But you know, when you're in the phase of trying to make some difficult decision, you want the real deal. And so, but yeah, you got to question all sources. Yes.
May I ask one? Those higher end numbers, though, those are unincorporated generally.
They're unincorporated? Yeah, most they're going to be Incline and yes.
And Montreux or Arrow Creek, I mean, they generally are not within the city of Reno. Maybe, you know, how much percent?
Well,
20%,
yeah,
25% maybe?
Somerset, that's a good question. You know, Somerset, Collin Ranch, you know, Wingfield Springs, those are still incorporated cities. That's a good question. My gut feeling would be a 50-50. I don't think there's that much activity, that much transactions happening in those Montreux and Incline areas. I think a lot of it's happening, well, Arrow Creek is still unincorporated, but that's a good question.
Any other questions? Excellent job. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Hey, Kate, when we finish this, would you give us these points, one to a page, so we can see them?
Absolutely. We have
I know I've got age on everybody else here, but I'd like to see them, so give us all a copy of them on a full page.
Sure. We're also
so
going to have the
read them.
presentation as you see it today on the website so
Thank you
that
very
everyone
much.
can access it. So, okay, thank you very much. I think you can see from Brian's presentation that we're still cautiously optimistic. There are some external factors to consider with 284 and Nevada's lag and Safari Club, various things that make us still very conservative in our estimates and where we project to go for 14. So, as you can see again, we are projecting and presenting to you a balanced budget. And I'm going to go into some of the ups and downs of the revenue projections of the budget as we see it for 14. We are looking at property taxes being essentially flat. It's a 0.2% decline. It's $80,000 out of $42 million. So I am hoping at the end of fiscal 14 that we're pleasantly surprised where that number is not red, but it moves into the black. But for the current moment, we are mirroring the assessor's prediction for that to be essentially flat. Franchise fees, as I mentioned previously, we're going to see the final year for electric, gas, and electric and gas franchise fees to come up to the 5% of that number. So we're currently at 4%. That goes up to 5%, and then that holds flat. So that's the last. Council doesn't need to take action on that. That already occurred. But that's the last of those increases for fiscal year 14. So we are projecting that franchise fees be up slightly due to that. Business licenses are trending upwards. So we're seeing some ups, that's for sure. And in CTAX, we're looking at currently, although in 4 days or so, we're going to get another number for February, which we're a little nervous about, but we are looking at currently a 2.5% projection up over the current fiscal year for CTAX. That's for fiscal 14. We've got varying degrees of percentage increase. I believe Sparks is at 2.5%. I think the county's projecting 3. I think the state's projecting 3. So it's just indicative of kind of where we feel we want to go with that number based on what we've got behind us for the moment. And there is a lag in that, so we're expecting, as I mentioned, those numbers to come in any day. We're also seeing some downward revenue issues. The first of the federal SAFER grants that we mentioned, equivalent to 10 positions, that expires or goes away at the end of this fiscal year, so in a couple months here. And we project, just based on the current situation, some additional revenue losses due to parking. Here are those revenues that I am mentioning per the categories that you've seen before. And you can see going through these, the numbers that I mentioned, the $80,000 decrease or delta in the ad valorem, and then the CTAX being up slightly, licenses and permits essentially flat. We've got our charges for service that are slightly downward. Intergovernmental, that's the tricky one. Those are the grants, and we, as you are aware, we never budget for those grants when we begin the fiscal process. We augment those in as we receive them. So what we also do to show the true picture is that we take out those expenditures on the expenditure side too. So you are seeing apples to apples, but that's why intergovernmental is always and always will probably show up as a decline in the fiscal year that we project to plan for. Fines and forfeitures, we're looking at a slight decrease in those. That has to do with some parking issues and some other things. And then total, we're looking at $164 million in projected for fiscal 14 against where we sit, and you've heard me explain some of the reasons why for that. On the expenditure side of the house, we have incorporated into the numbers that you're seeing here the budget balancing solutions that we mentioned, and so you're going to see reflective that one of those issues is, for instance, a premium holiday, and so you see there in the benefits line that number is reflected as a positive. Pre the exercise of going through and balancing the budget, when we take a first snapshot, we saw a very different picture. So at the end of the day, though, you see that our expenditures are slightly under what we're projecting for the revenue, so that's a good situation to be in. And I'm going to jump into some detail on how we got to this scenario. The first item that you may or may not have heard is that we are instituting an immediate hiring freeze, and so that helps us to the tune of about $1.7 million projected over fiscal 14. I will say that within that number, we have to back out about $225,000. Part of those positions that are being frozen are some dispatch folks, and because they're currently vacant and they're operating that facility right now, they're operating on mandatory overtime, and so we baked in that mandatory overtime expenditure into the budget that you see, so that it won't be a true, if nothing changed, we're anticipating $1.7 million less the couple $100,000 for overtime. But obviously throughout the fiscal year, things ebb and flow, and so we'll be absorbing or reacting to those as those occur. And I guess we can go through this first slide and ask questions, or however you'd like to do it, but there are a couple of slides around the items that are included in the budget balancing. So if that's council's wish, we can do it that way, or you can go line by line, or we can wait till the end. It's your call, Mr. Mayor. You want to go to the end of the slide? And then go back and cover the things on this slide?
I think so.
Okay. So with Community Pride Grant funding, we are looking for fiscal 14 to eliminate that funding. That is the money that goes to the NABs, as you're aware. Part of it was, per council's direction, we wanted to focus more on those things that are occurring in the neighborhood, graffiti abatement being one of those high priority items. So that money going towards a partial year for the graffiti increase in graffiti abatement. That's the 3 positions that were discussed at the last council meeting, and this is again beginning January 1. That's the $90,000 that you see there because of the chief's ability and willingness to fund those positions as he gets them hired with asset forfeiture money until then. We also have part of that directed to a community outreach program that satisfies the NABs, so that issue it will help enhance the way that those meetings and that purpose will function within the community. So we see that to be a really effective utilization of that redirect. And then the remaining expenditures would be used to offset the shortfalls in the budget, so that's on the Community Pride Grant fundings. I mentioned the insurance premium holiday. We're looking at 4 months for about $2.2 million. Because we are self-funded, this would be the city's not paying itself for the insurance for those 4 months. It also means that employees that have money that they need to put towards insurance because they have dependent coverage will also get that break from the insurance costs for 4 months. So there's sort of a benefit to, as far as discretionary spending, I guess you could say, from that action item. We're going to be holding the general fund fleet replacement for fiscal 14. That's only general fund. That allows us to recover about $870,000 in costs over the fiscal year. We believe that the current inventory would satisfy and allow us to continue to operate just fine for the fiscal year. So again, that just sort of delays the replacement for one year as a budget balancing measure. And then finally, I'm just going to mention, I already told you that this is coming, but the SAFER grant, the first of the 2 SAFER grants that we have, expires. I have 8 positions listed here because we are in the process of seeking 2 exemptions for currently vacant positions. So we look to absorb about 8 of those positions into the general fund come fiscal 14. So if you have questions on these items, we can certainly go through them now. If not, we can.
I do have a question.
Sure.
For fiscal 14, you have an immediate hiring freeze. Has the city been doing any hiring in the last 2 years?
Currently, when positions become vacant, depending on the nature and necessity or the payout time that we need to keep that position vacant, yeah, I mean, there have been discussions on it. When any position becomes vacant, we go through the process of analyzing whether we need that position, whether we can do it with less, with temporary, with contract staff. There's a lot of provisions that go into analyzing each of the positions when they come available. But no, I mean, it's literally just replacing positions that become vacant. Of course, I'm cheating and using Gala to fill a full-time position that left for a short term before, so that sort of idea is how we're applying those things.
So immediate hiring freeze impacts replacement as well as
Correct.
additional?
Correct, unless so designated by the city manager. So if there's a critical need, like let's say, I retire or something, we need to probably replace those positions, critical positions within the city. I think are up to the discretion of the city manager. But for currently, it's immediate hiring freeze, which means currently vacated or to be vacated positions.
On the property tax revenues coming in, a 0.2% decline still. Venturing into an area I know nothing about, but having watched the property tax protest process that went through up an incline, do cities or the county, as the ones who receive property tax, or even the state, ever participate and watch the protests as they come through and become parties to those? And what is our practice on that?
So we've started a program where we are keeping in much more close conversation with the assessor and various other sectors around the city through a program that the city managers implemented to kind of open up those lines of communication. So those are part of the discussions. I don't know that we formally send someone to watch those proceedings, but yeah, I mean, we definitely have a finger on the pulse of what's going on with that because it does have a potential to impact us. And I don't know if Angie wants to.
And I'll just add, the numbers that you see for property tax, I mean, those do come from the county assessor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they go through their assessment process, and they give us those numbers. So those numbers really don't change that much once they give them to us. And I don't know whether or not they factor in those appeals. I'm imagining that they do. And to my knowledge, the city has not participated in those from a legal standpoint on any of those property tax appeals. I'm looking at the city attorney's office to confirm that, but I don't believe that we've participated in those in any sort of official capacity.
Tracy Chase, Reno City Attorney's Office. My recollection is there's limited availability for us to participate in the law, but I do know a couple years ago we did monitor and go to some proceedings, but I can look that up and provide counsel with the official what the city can and cannot do.
Yeah, and it may not be necessarily a legal issue, but a best practice for cities, how cities in general participate. So that's one comment. The premium holiday healthcare, Brian Bonifant, when he was here, mentioned the impact of the ACA, and you're comfortable that the program is robust enough that we can do this, and we won't have any unknowns coming with ACA.
Right. So there's a slide a little bit later on that I'm going to talk about some of the policies around how we get to whether or not we can perform an action like that, and what we are left with and what our risk is. And so we're very comfortable that doing the 4-month premium holiday doesn't affect our ability to react to that at all.
Okay, another question, the hiring freeze. At the last meeting, I think Chief Hernandez mentioned that he is losing another battalion chief, and he had lost one before, and then we had a side agreement so that he wouldn't have to pay overtime to a captain, and then this other gentleman decided to retire. And I guess, you know, in terms of the hiring freeze, is we're bringing these 8 on, and we're requesting a waiver for the other 2, but we also now have to bring up or pay overtime on a captain. Can we somehow funnel that in and say, look, we would like to reduce the battalion load, maybe, because I remember going through the organizational chart and it looked like there was potential maybe to merge 2 or so, and somehow funnel that in, because reorder our composition. And I know we have CBA agreements, but I also know that when I look at the current budget numbers, a lot of the burn through in that department is because the SAFER grant only went to the firefighters, not to the upper level folks, you know, the water tenders or so on. So I'm wondering how this new backfilling of that position is can work in and maybe bring us some cost savings in that department. Given any thought to that?
Well, in regards, and you mentioned it briefly, I mean, that is a contractual issue. In our contract for the battalion chiefs, there is a staffing standard that's currently in that agreement. So if we were to, we really have to maintain that staffing standard. So we either do it by bringing up a captain, and I believe we have to get their agreement to be able to do that, or we do it with overtime, or we hire. So I mean, that's an area where it really makes the most sense to hire, because we have that minimum staffing standard in the contract. If we didn't want to fill that position, we would really have to get that group to agree to that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one that we have that minimum requirement if it's not operationally essential with the reduction in the split. You know, can we ask for only to hire 7 on and get a waiver for another one then, and knowing that we have to overstaff on the higher ranks? I mean, is that something we...
Well, part of the issue with the SAFER grant is that part of the stipulation for accepting the SAFER grant is that you cannot lay positions off. So that's the reason that we're going for, that we're losing 10, but we're funding 8, because we have the 2 retirements. So as we see retirements in the fire department, we will ask for waivers not to fill those, but we cannot actually lay positions off. If we did not fund the 8 positions, we would be laying those positions off, which would violate the SAFER grant.
And my other question is about the community pride grants and the money going to graffiti abatement. Graffiti abatement is in the police department, correct?
There's police department and the public works department. There's the maintenance workers, and then there is the office assistant.
So this, I can't remember what it was. Oh, 90,000. Is that going to public works or police?
It's going partially to both. I believe it's the 2 maintenance workers are in public works, and then it's all going to police. Okay, I stand corrected.
It's going where?
It's all going to the police department.
The police department. Now, the police department has a $54 million budget, and I'm just wondering, you know, and I know the composition of that and the public, you know, the need, but it seems like maybe when we get deeper into those line items, the 90,000 from the Community Pride Grant is going from community resources, community non-public safety into public safety, and maybe there's room to balance that 90,000 out of the 54 million so that we can keep more money into the community.
And on the 6th, you're going to be able to get into this and do that. And so we're not going to get into that today, because we will. We'll even get into the courts. I love to see the judge here sweating it out with us today. So it's very nice to see you, Your Honor.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, I just want to get staff to clarify one thing, because my understanding on the graffiti abatement is that we were funding 2 maintenance worker positions. And I'm seeing heads nodding yes.
Correct.
So when you say it's going to the police department, it's not funding sworn positions, it's funding maintenance workers. So I wanted to clarify that because it's,
And the
think
nexus
it's a
was
little
that
bit
graffiti's an
confusing.
issue in every ward, and so it's, I mean, I know it comes up a lot for us, so, there's that direct nexus with where those grants are being, or that grant money's being redirected.
I have one more question, too, and I'm sticking on this hiring freeze, and I guess on the 6th we'll get into more of the details of it, but yeah, I guess my question is for police, and I don't see the chief here today, but my question is, how does this impact retiring, particularly patrol officers or those that are being, that are going up the ranks, and how does this impact boots on the ground and patrol officers? How does this hiring freeze impact their numbers, patrol officer numbers?
For the record, Tom Robinson here on behalf of Chief Pitts and the men and women of the Reno Police Department. Good morning, sorry, morning, right? Yeah. Right now, we're holding, I think, 9 or 10 funded positions that we've lost to attrition. So they're approved, but we're holding on to them to find out where to go with the budget. 8. We have 9, though. I think one more is coming.
4 officers.
So it does end up trickling down to patrol. We try to minimize the impact to field services by absorbing the hit in in our other divisions.
So the open 9 positions or 8 positions, those would have been filled in patrol, and now if the hiring freeze goes in, they won't be filled?
Correct.
Thank you.
These are the type of questions that we're going to be getting into on the 6th, and we'll be able to have a lot of fun with this then. And,
The number you see up there includes 4 officers.
and Mr. Mayor, I just might, for council's just clarity on this, I mean, where we're at, as Kate goes through this, and as you see at the end of the day, I mean, where we're at on this, with the hiring freeze and not doing fleet purchases and the insurance premium holiday, I mean, we're balanced, but we only have a 4% reserve. So if there's a desire on council not to do, for example, a hiring freeze, that's going to have to be cut from somewhere else or taken out of somewhere else. I mean, there's unfortunately, for council, from a policy-making standpoint, there is very little wiggle room to move stuff around. If you want to, we can certainly pursue that, but you're going to be taking it from somewhere else, unfortunately. I mean, that's the situation that we're in.
Further questions on the first slide in the expenditure budgeting process?
okay, thank you.
So continuing on, we went back to the departments, and even though we did what we call the great shakedown during the budget process with each of our fellow department heads and department staff members, we went back and said, hey, can we further cut in services and supplies, non-personnel, to get to a $500,000 number? And proportionately, as far as what their expenses were overall to the general services and supplies budget, we said if city manager was 12% or whatnot, can you cut 12% of your services and supplies? And so they went through that exercise and came up with those reductions, and I've got those listed for where they would take that if that's the case. So we have gone back to every department and further reduced their services and supplies, which included a lot of items like training and travel and things of that nature, what was left of that. CIP savings from fiscal year 13. What this involves is we've got $85,000 that was dedicated last fiscal year for an art project that has not been expended to date, and we're recommending that and some prior year savings from the capital improvement program be reduced to the tune of $200,000. And I'm going to jump ahead here in a slide that shows you the overall art funding. So we'll have that discussion as well. But that is where we get an additional $200,000 is from some of those savings from the current fiscal year and then some prior years as well as that particular project. In addition, we're looking at taking some room
Just a
tax
minute,
money.
please.
Kate?
I'm
Just a
sorry.
minute.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to remember what that 85 was.
That was an Art in Reno project that Councilman Ayazi had wanted. It was originally intended to be along 4th Street and
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What, under the 1% for the arts,
No.
compliant?
No.
Okay, it was
No.
beyond
This
that.
is a
Correct.
different.
right. And then we've got room tax to special events. Essentially what we're looking at doing there is to take the funding that we've got dedicated from room tax towards the arts and move that to the special events funding, which then allows the general fund to have less of a contribution to special events. The room tax, as you're aware, has to be used for tourism and those sorts of things. So there definitely is a nexus there in order for us to be able to move in that direction. It is a reduction, and you'll see on that slide when I get to it, is a slight reduction to the support for the arts, but it does still maintain a robust art support for, again, fiscal year 14. And then it's not increasing the special event budget by any means. It's just freeing up that general fund for us to be able to balance the budget with.
Hey, Kate?
Sure.
Question about the council budget contingency. I was going through the budget book for this year last night, and in the council budget, there's something, 74% is legislative, which I assume is, the 7-hour compensation. 26% is council tourism. What is that? Is that the 100,000?
I believe that, that's the room tax. So that's the room tax money that comes in as a result of that, the allocation from the percentage on each room per night, that money coming in comes into the city council's budget, or that's where it's located.
The city, okay, so the city's share of room tax goes into the council budget. Why? I mean, I just... how did that why doesn't it just roll into the general fund and then blow out? I mean, that's kind of an interesting there must have been some link thinking at one point.
Right, and I was not here for that, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Ms. Emery.
Gayla Emery from Office of Budget Management. Back when the room tax was assessed back in 1990, we got 1%, and at that time, council passed a resolution that half of it would go towards Parks and Recreation support, and half would go towards tourism or downtown support. It shows on the council's budget, but it's actually in the room tax fund, so it's not part of your general fund budget.
Okay.
It's separate from that. The 100,000 is not showing on your budget because it shows in a contingency account, so you won't see that on those budget pages.
Okay, that brings up a good point, is in terms of a new council coming on, those little budgets, those little resolutions that are hiding out there, not hiding, but, resolutions are a great tool, I believe in them, but exist. Those should maybe, be appendix or something. Let us know what they all are.
Right, and I agree with you. I think as we continue to go through the budget process, and you saw our first attempt at this last year, we're really trying to realign things within the budget so that they are very clear in the efforts of being transparent and for our own information, because there is a lot we have to bring somebody like Gayla back to explain these things because we've got a lot of nuances as this has evolved. The fourth bullet down, you see the elimination of the council contingency. That's the $100,000 line item that we've had to turn to in the past when council has come forward with projects or ideas for expenditure, and we didn't have really a place that was appropriate to turn to. Staff would then recommend that council contingency be utilized, and the council as a whole would vote on that item. We're recommending elimination of that contingency in 14. The fifth bullet down, we currently fund Catholic Charities in the Children's Cabinet to the tune of $50,000. This is recommending the elimination of that funding in fiscal 14. And then lastly, council currently receives each council member approximately $10,000 as their donation money to put forth efforts into the community. We're recommending the reduction of that donation amount to half, which would afford each council member approximately $5,000 to continue those efforts. And with that, we can cover the items that are on this slide if it's so.
We ever look at eliminating cars and cell phone allowances?
That is up to the council, and I think there was discussion earlier on that as regard to potential offset for the increases that are coming in salary, but that's certainly up to you for your discretion.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So I mentioned the fund alignment, and there was a question that had come up earlier, hey, are we going to be okay if we go on this premium holiday? And so we have a process that we go through where we review and adjust annually the funds and where they are per the policy, per the actuarial recommendations, and where we are as far as fund balances. It's always nice to have a really robust reserve, but at the same time, it's inefficient for us to have reserve levels that are out of alignment with what the policy states. And so for the Reno self-funded medical, even with what we've got for the premium holiday and what we need to have, which is 50% of the prior year's expenditure as retained earnings, plus the incurred but not reported, which is the IBNR, we will still have almost $1.5 million remaining after that is implemented. The risk fund is another item that we're looking at aligning as part of the process, and that it also has policies around it. The recommendation is that we take some of that to utilize for the budget stabilization or for the balancing of the budget. After that process, we're looking at approximately $1.9 million remaining after the incurred out reported per the actuarial. So again, I go through the fact that as just good fiscal practice, you look at those funds every year and adjust them as necessary. There'll be years that we need to add to them. There are years that we need to kind of reduce those balances. But as that process for fund alignment, that affords us the ability to come forward with a budget that's balanced. Here's the arts slide that I mentioned. We look at the fiscal 12-13 current year funding and then the recommendation for 13-14. You can still see that there is very good support for the arts. And again, it's a one fiscal year idea. You can see the reduction to the Pioneer Center and then potentially to Art Town. The allocation of the art in public places is essentially, it's not that we're cutting that funding, it's that there has been funding that hasn't been utilized. And so instead of the $200,000 number that would be in there for 14, it's recommended 0, and that ties back to the slide that I originally showed you as far as the reductions for that. This doesn't touch what the city's ability or requirements are around the 2% that we have to dedicate to public art based on capital expenditures. It's just that in the past there were some projects that shouldn't have qualified, whether they were remodels or whatever the provisions were, that upon doing some analysis, staff found that we had overfunded some of those. So that's, again, it's a one-time thing, but it allows us to bring forward that opportunity to balance the budget. And then I mentioned that $85,000 Art in Reno project that Ms. Zadra brought up. Sorry, it's confusing. Your signs are flipped, so I keep looking at your names and they're wrong. So if you have questions on the art funding slide, I'd be happy to answer those at this time.
Explain a little bit about the Art Commission. Is that
the funding?
Yeah, what is
the
that?
details on the funding for that?
Is that the grants?
I believe those are the grants that we have that we approve every year. Usually around this time of year, we have the grants. They go through a process. The arts community comes forward and goes through a process for which they ask for funding. We've got money set aside for that. And I believe that's, and Christine, I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but I believe that's what's comprised of that piece. I'm not the expert on that, so I'm going to turn to the expert.
For the record, I'm Christine Fair, Arts and Culture Manager also. I'm the Resource Development and Cultural Affairs Manager for the City of Reno. The $182,500 is an allocation that the Arts and Culture Commission has used for grants in part, and then also they have a couple of special projects that they do. So they did, for instance, the Art Blast this last year. They also have been a funder of Opening Night of Art Town, that sort of thing. And so that's been money that has been based on the percentage of that 1/2 of 1% in the room tax fund.
Okay, thank you. Braggers.
You know, along the arts question is if we could see the resolution that established the 2%, you know, along the resolutions. But my thinking on that is that generally the art in public places is a tie to capital projects. And the capital projects, I mean, we're a city that's spending $200,000 on capital projects. Now, that's not necessarily entirely a reflection of how minimal our resources are. It's a reflection of how full service we are, because we have RTC that does it, and, you know, we don't do the water utilities. Our waste management is on contract, you know, our waste is on. So, I mean, not that those do large capital, but and I'm just wondering, you know, is that kind of tying into the thinking? Because the art in public places would be tied to capital. And then do we follow with these other agencies and make sure that that express value of our art tied to capital investment is going on all these other subcommittees, like TUMWA, for example?
Right, and that's a good question. The capital that you're mentioning, the $200,000 though, that is not our capital improvement program or the capital expenditures wholly for the city. That was just the fire, and I've been confused by that myself because we call it capital in the general fund.
Okay.
So that's that $200,000 that we're talking about. But your point is taken that yes, we have historically dedicated that percentage, and whether or not we do that in alignment with RTC or those others, I have to defer to the arts community on that. But this is not taking away delay the funding for that, that resolution would still be in existence and would proceed forward as it lives. This is us looking back, doing some analysis over that and saying, you know what, we really can use some of that money that wasn't or shouldn't have qualified over the years. And again, this is a one-time thing to help us balance the budget.
So in our CIP, we still follow the 2% ourselves?
Correct.
Okay.
Per resolution and council's direction.
Ms. Jordan?
With regards to Art Town, when the balance of special events went to in-kind donations only, which was this last year, I guess my question is this: has Art Town ever had a reduction in the amount that the city contributes to it in the past? Where did it start, and where does this fall in line with that?
In the immediate future, I'm not aware of one, but I would, historically, on where Art Town has been funded, I can certainly bring Christine back up again if she'd like to speak to that item.
Again, for the record, I'm Christine Fay, Resource Development and Cultural Affairs Manager. Actually, Art Town's funding began when the Arts and Culture Commission created Art Town of 10 Downtown Art Town, and we spun it off as its own 501c3. Their funding started at about $40,000, went to $75,000, went to $100,000. In their 10th anniversary, it went to $175,000 for a one-time additional allocation, and then it went back to the $100,000, and then it crept up to $125,000. They did get a $5,000 reduction 2 years ago, but then it was reinstated in this current fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, 2% for art is actually Chapter 22. It's actually an ordinance.
Okay, further questions on the arts support slide?
Just get us copies of what Ms. Brackus asked for.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've talked about the ways that we have balanced the budget. I'll lead into some of the issues that we're facing as far as challenges. You've heard Mr. Klinger talk about the fact that we only have and are budgeting our fund balance at 4%, which is the minimum required. We are all eyes on focusing towards getting to a more robust reserve level so that when we face the next economic downturn, and we will, that we're able to weather the storm without making reductions in our already depleted staff. So our big eye on the prize right now is getting to that 8.3% reserve level. We have seen, as you saw by Brian Bonenfant's presentation, a slow revenue recovery. We are recovering, but I'm, again, cautiously optimistic, which is a challenge for us because of the lag that Nevada experiences in the overall frame or picture. We have increasing employee costs. That has to do with health care and contracts and everything from workers' comp to you name it. Our people are our resource, or the way that we do business, and they are increasing. And they will, as far as those costs are concerned. We have something that we haven't talked about very much, and I'm sure Mr. Flansburgh will cover if I allow him the opportunity on the 6th, which is our aging infrastructure and the deferred maintenance that is a looming elephant in the room as far as what we've got to do to dedicate resources around taking care of those things that we currently own and maintain. The other item that I'll talk to is unfunded liabilities. We've got the post-employment benefits, which is the OPEB that you hear us mention. Currently, we are funding the pay-as-you-go portion of that to adequately fund that level, and I'll show you a slide here next. We need to up that by quite a bit. And then we have our workers' compensation as one of those items that's out there for a challenge that we keep our eye on. Talking to the reserve levels, this is a little slide that shows you where we are, where we'd like to be, and kind of the overall status of our reserves. I mean, our reserves really are something that we have to turn a solid eye to if we're going to be fiscally responsible and stable in the future. And so in order to get to that level, we need more than a couple weeks operating. We're looking at going to the 8.3% that I mentioned for fund balance, which is a month's worth of operating. And to get there, we need to dedicate quite a bit of resources towards that, as you can see. I mentioned pay-as-you-go for OPEB. We currently fund the bare minimum that we need to. Per the actuarial, the annual required contribution, or the ARC, would mean that we would have to put an additional $11 million into our budget to bring ourselves up to speed on that mechanism. And then finally, the stabilization account that I mentioned, which is kind of our safety net, if you will. That we have currently budgeted in fiscal 14 at 1.7, just again as one of those budget balancing measures, and we need to beef that up a little bit as the opportunity presents itself in the future. That's what I had for you today as far as a high-level depiction of how we got to the balanced budget. You will obviously have the opportunity on May 6th to delve into the departments. We'll talk about the other funds. We'll give you a more robust picture of how things are proceeding, but I wanted to at least bring forward to the council for consideration the manager recommended budget, which is a general snapshot that I show you of the general fund. So with that, any direction that we have today or requests for information, we'll certainly go back and compile and provide for the council. You'll be getting a lot of information before the May 6th meeting as far as the departmental narratives and things of that nature. So without further ado, I will take any questions, or we can adjourn until the 6th.
I think it's very good. You should furnish oxygen next time you take us up that high.
I'm sorry. Sorry, this is preliminary. We haven't done this before, but we have a new council.
I'm glad we did. It's very informative and what we need to look forward.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. What do you need from us today?
Just what you've provided, information that you were looking for more detailed analysis on before we go into the 6th. What you saw are the items that are in the budget right now. If you want to change any of that, obviously Andrew mentioned that it's going to require taking it from somewhere else, but if you're okay with what we need, we proceed forward to the 6th with the budget as you've seen it today.
Mr. Mayor and Council, just to add on to that, what we'd be looking for from Council today is that if there's a different direction you want us to take on some of these items. I mean, there was a little bit of discussion on the hiring freeze and how it affects, some of the other departments. If there are things that you want us to go back and look at that are and take a different direction than what was presented today, it would be good to know that so we can bring that back on the 6th. If there are things that we did not present to you today that you want to see presented on the 6th, I know there were some questions asked as we went along, and we'll certainly take those items and bring those back on the 6th. But if there's any other any other items or changes that you want to see, now would be the time to give staff that direction to bring it back on the 6th.
I think what you're asking for is going to get us into the middle of the budget discussion right now. We've all seen the high altitude, and I think when we're going to get into it next week, if there's some major changes they want to see, but if not, we just open up Pandora's box to go through the whole thing.
Mr. Mayor, I have a few questions still.
All right.
That last slide, the goals that you had up there, are those on the fourth column, the goal, are those adopted by any resolution, or are they just kind of staff's thinking of what the goals are?
So the fund balance there actually is in 354
It's an NRS.
Yeah.
Okay.
To require us to be at a minimum of 4% for local government finance operation. 8.3 is the maximum we can be at without that number being open to collective bargaining. And so
Okay.
that's the range that we'd like to hit as far as the state law provides.
The 8.3.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
OPEB is really an actuarial-based number, so in order for us to fund that responsibility into the future and pay for those benefits, we per the actuarial need to be working towards getting that annual required contribution funded.
Is the RTC deposit in that 4.9?
It is not.
Oh, 5.9. Okay. And then my other question, reading through the budget book, we have a number of budget policies, fund policies. I think we have fund policies. And I had looked at some best practices and thought about maybe a debt policy or debt refinancing policy. And so I guess as part of this process, what I would look for is a overview of our financial policies, and if there's any that maybe in the next year would be worth bringing online or reconsidering. So I'm really focusing on the mechanics there. And then I also want to know about, because the discussion did not address any of our debt liabilities. Do we have any, I know during the depth of the recession when the city council was having to make tough decisions on layoffs, they were also having to go to lenders and talk about forbearance and this and that. And I just want to know if there's any things that are on pause out there that we could be hit with. And that even opens up to more risk management judgments that could be coming our way.
So
and I don't need the full answer today either.
I was just going to say, council was provided a debt overview by our finance director. We can certainly do that on the 6th if that's helpful. It doesn't really play into, we have obviously close communication on these issues and how it would feed into fiscal 14. So it plays a factor as far as how we budget for those, how we satisfy the debt and the refinances and so forth. But so noted on the policy around debt. refinancing. But if the council chooses, we can do that on the 6th,
And
go
Mis-
over the debt
And Mr. Mayor,
portfolio.
just to add on to what Kate is saying, I mean, the areas where we have challenges with our debt are really isolated from the operating budget because they are revenue bonds, and really the only recourse the bondholders have is that stream of revenue. That stream of revenue essentially is what's collateralized. So if you look at the retract bonds, for example, it's the sales tax. So there's really no recourse beyond that sales tax. In other words, they can't come in to the general fund in any way. So it doesn't impact the operating budgets, if that answers your question.
My only comment, and I know we'll get into the meat of this on the 6th, is that we set priorities at our meeting 2 months ago, and those were a result of the survey taken in our community, or at least some of the priorities were driven by the results of those surveys. And the very first one was to provide safe and livable neighborhoods. My only concern, not my only, but one of my major concerns is the impacts to our emergency services, first line, police officers, patrol officers, and the impacts of this hiring freeze. And I guess my only direction, if there is any today, is to the police to see how we mitigate those numbers and those replacement of those patrol officers, given that this is a priority.
Any other questions at this point? Thank you very much. You did an excellent job. Any
Thank you, Mr.
public
Mayor.
comment cards or anything? My favorite motion now?
Motion.
To adjourn, second, everything. All in favor, say aye. This meeting's adjourned.